At 32, I opened my dream bakery and sent personal invites to my whole family. Opening day arrived and I stood alone while Instagram filled with photos from my sister's party. Then Dad texted, "We need to discuss the bakery." What my family didn't know was that I'd spent the last 7 years quietly building something far bigger than they could imagine. While they assumed I was just another failed baker playing house, I was actually sitting on assets worth $340,000 in connections that could destroy their precious reputations overnight. I'm Eileen Marshall, and for 15 years my high-achieving family had treated me like their personal disappointment, while my sister Rosie lived as the golden child. But that morning, as I stood in my empty bakery reading Dad's condescending text, I realized they'd made a critical miscalculation. They thought they were dealing with the same insecure girl who used to beg for their approval. They had no idea they'd just declared war on someone who'd been strategic planning for exactly this moment. Let me explain what they missed while they were busy dismissing me. My father, James, was a corporate attorney at Whitman and Associates, pulling in $180,000 annually representing mid-tier clients. My mother, Diane, earned $95,000 as a hospital administrator. Combined, their household income was $275,000, respectable, but not exactly Fortune 500 territory. What they didn't know was that my bakery represented just the visible tip of a much larger iceberg. 7 years ago, after Grandma Eliza left me her $45,000 inheritance, I'd made a decision that would change everything. Instead of opening a simple neighborhood bakery like everyone expected, I'd spent 2 years studying commercial real estate, food service logistics, and franchise development. I'd worked 3 jobs not just to save money, but to understand every aspect of the hospitality industry from ground level up. The corner location I'd chosen for Sweet Gatherings wasn't random sentiment, it was strategic positioning. The neighborhood was in the early stages of gentrification, with property values projected to increase 40% over the next 5 years. I'd secured a 10-year lease at $2,800 monthly, locked in at pre-development rates. Comparable spaces were now renting for $4,200. That lease alone was worth $168,000 in guaranteed savings. But Sweet Gatherings was never meant to be just one bakery. It was designed as the prototype for a franchise system I'd been developing with Margaret Torres, a former Starbucks regional operations director who'd become my silent business partner. Margaret brought 20 years of corporate expansion experience and a network of investors looking for the next artisanal food concept to scale nationally. My personal financial position was something my family had never bothered to investigate. The $340,000 I'd accumulated wasn't just sitting in savings, it was strategically deployed. $120,000 was invested in a diversified portfolio, returning 8% annually. $65,000 was tied up in equipment and infrastructure that could be replicated across multiple locations. $85,000 remained liquid for operational expenses and expansion opportunities. Additionally, I owned my downtown condo outright, worth $195,000 in the current market. More importantly, I'd spent 7 years building relationships with people who actually mattered in the food service industry. Rebecca Foster, the restaurant critic for our city's major newspaper, had been a regular customer during my catering days and had promised to review Sweet Gatherings within the first month. David Chen, who owned 3 of the most successful farm-to-table restaurants in the region, had expressed interest in carrying my artisanal breads wholesale. Linda Rodriguez, who managed catering for the convention center, had already placed orders worth $8,000 for upcoming events. What made my family's dismissal particularly dangerous for them was that their own professional reputations depended heavily on social standing and community perception. Dad's law firm specialized in corporate clients who valued stability and family values in their legal representation. Mom's hospital administration role required maintaining relationships with board members who moved in the same social circles. Rosie's marketing career at Tech Fusion was built on her personal brand as someone who understood community engagement and authentic storytelling. They'd made their choice to publicly humiliate me by choosing her promotion party over my opening day. Now they were about to learn that I'd spent 7 years preparing for exactly this kind of betrayal, and I had resources they couldn't even imagine. The morning after my disastrous opening day, I arrived at Sweet Gatherings at 5 a.m. to find my entire family filing in like a corporate intervention team. Dad led with his leather portfolio, Mom followed with her hospital administrator inspection stare, and Rosie brought her tablet displaying Tyler video calling from New York. They'd coordinated this ambush with military precision. "We need to discuss the bakery situation," Dad announced, spreading pre-filled real estate listing agreements across my counter. "I've contacted Brennan Properties. They specialize in failed restaurant ventures. We can minimize your losses if we move quickly." I wiped flour from my hands and studied the documents. They'd prepared everything, listing price recommendations, financial projections showing inevitable failure, even medical school applications Mom had completed on my behalf. The level of preparation was staggering, and it revealed something crucial. They'd been planning this intervention since before my opening day. Based on neighborhood demographics and foot traffic analysis, Tyler's voice crackled through the tablet, "You're looking at insolvency within 4 months. The numbers don't support specialty retail in this location." What Tyler didn't know was that I had the actual demographic studies, commissioned from the same firm his investment bank used for commercial real estate analysis. The reports showed foot traffic increasing 23% monthly as the neighborhood gentrified, with median household income rising from $48,000 to $61,000 over the past 18 months. His analysis was based on data that was 2 years old. "The restaurant industry has an 80% failure rate in the first year," Mom added, sliding a hospital administration program brochure toward me. "It's not too late to pursue something stable. I could make some calls." As they outlined their solution to my supposed failure, I pulled out my phone and sent a single text to Margaret Torres. "Execute Plan B. Family situation confirmed hostile. Proceed with media strategy." Her response came back within 30 seconds. "Rebecca Foster interview scheduled 2 p.m. today. David Chen meeting moved to Thursday. Linda Rodriguez contract ready for signature. You sure about full exposure?" I typed back. "Full exposure confirmed." What I was about to activate would change everything because my family had made one critical error. They'd assumed Sweet Gatherings was a desperate vanity project by their failure daughter. They had no idea it was the carefully planned first move in a business strategy that would make their combined annual income look like pocket money. With my phone still in hand, I looked at my family clustered around their intervention materials and made a decision that would reshape our entire relationship dynamic. "You want to discuss the bakery situation?" I said calmly. "Let's discuss it properly." I walked to my office area and retrieved a folder I'd prepared months earlier, knowing this day would eventually come. Inside were documents that would shatter every assumption they'd made about me, my business, and my future prospects. "Tyler, you mentioned demographic analysis," I said, placing the current market study on the counter. "This is from Hamilton Research Associates, the same firm your bank uses for commercial real estate valuations. Foot traffic in this area has increased 23% over the past year, with projected growth of 35% through 2025. Tyler's expression changed as he recognized the firm's letterhead. "How did you get Hamilton Research? That's expensive institutional-level analysis." "I commissioned it, just like I commissioned the franchise feasibility study from Brennan Consulting Group." I placed another document on the counter. "Same people who did the market entry analysis for Panera's West Coast expansion." The room went quiet as Dad picked up the Brennan report. These weren't documents from some local business development center. These were professional studies from firms that charge $15,000 for market analysis. "Margaret Torres, former VP of Operations for Starbucks Pacific Northwest region, is my business partner. I continued. She's been advising me for 2 years on franchise development strategy. Sweet Gatherings isn't just one bakery, it's the prototype for a regional chain. I opened my laptop and projected our franchise development presentation onto the wall. 23 slides detailing market opportunity, operational systems, financial projections, and expansion timeline. The same presentation Margaret had shown to potential investors last month. Initial funding for 5 locations is secured through Torres Development Partners, I said, clicking through financial projections that showed $2.3 million in projected revenue by year 3. We're looking at markets in Portland, Seattle, and San Francisco for the pilot expansion. Mom was staring at the financial projections with her hospital administrator's eye for budgets. Eileen, these numbers. If this is real, you're talking about building something worth millions. It is real. Rebecca Foster from the Herald is interviewing me this afternoon for a feature on emerging food entrepreneurs. David Chen wants to discuss wholesale contracts for his restaurant group. The convention center has already placed orders worth $8,000 for next quarter's events. I clicked to the final slide, which showed my personal investment in the project. I've put $340,000 of my own money into this venture. Not borrowed money, money I saved over 7 years of strategic planning. The silence that followed was deafening. Tyler was doing rapid mental calculations. Dad was reviewing the Brennan Consulting letterhead. Mom was reading the financial projections with growing amazement. Rosie had stopped taking photos and was actually listening for the first time. "You have $340,000? Rosie asked, her voice small. "I own my condo outright, worth $195,000. I have $120,000 in diversified investments. The bakery equipment and infrastructure represent $65,000 in assets. I maintain $85,000 in liquid capital for operational expenses." I looked at each of them. "My personal net worth is $605,000. Dad set down the documents, his lawyer's brain processing the implications. "Eileen, if these projections are accurate, you're building something that could be worth $10 million within 5 years. Conservative estimates based on comparable artisanal food franchises, yes." The transformation in the room was immediate and telling. Suddenly, Tyler was asking about investment opportunities. Mom was wondering if the hospital board would be interested in corporate catering services. Rosie was suggesting social media collaboration strategies. Dad was offering legal services for franchise development. But I wasn't done revealing what they'd missed while dismissing me as their family failure. "There's something else you need to understand," I said, opening another folder. "Yesterday, while you were celebrating Rosie's promotion, I wasn't just standing in an empty bakery feeling sorry for myself. I was documenting everything. I placed printed screenshots on the counter, social media posts from my parents and siblings, time-stamped and geotagged, showing them at Rosie's party with captions about family priorities and supporting real success. Posts that made it clear they'd deliberately chosen her celebration over my opening day. Rebecca Foster is particularly interested in family dynamics and entrepreneurship," I continued. "She's planning to focus on how emerging business owners navigate unsupportive family relationships. It's going to be a very personal feature story." The implication crashed over them like cold water. A newspaper article about the family who abandoned their daughter's business opening would be devastating to their professional reputations. Dad's corporate clients, Mom's hospital board, Rosie's marketing career, all of it dependent on community perception of family values and personal integrity. "Eileen," Dad said carefully, "surely we can discuss this privately as a family." "We are discussing it as a family. The same family that spent yesterday celebrating Rosie's promotion while I stood alone in my bakery. The same family that just tried to convince me to liquidate a $600,000 business venture because you assumed I was too incompetent to succeed." I gathered up my documents and franchise materials. The interview with Rebecca Foster is at 2 p.m. The Herald feature runs Sunday morning. Margaret Torres has meetings scheduled with potential investors, all next week based on the publicity we expect to generate. Looking at their shocked faces, I realized this was the moment I'd been unconsciously preparing for my entire life. The moment when they finally saw me clearly, not as their family disappointment, but as someone who'd built something extraordinary while they weren't paying attention. "You wanted to discuss the bakery situation," I said. "There's the situation. I'm building a multi-million-dollar business, and I did it without asking for your money, your connections, or your approval. Yesterday, you made it clear I don't have your support. Today, I'm making it clear I don't need it." The next phase began immediately after my family slipped out of sweet gatherings, looking like people who'd just learned their neighbor had been running a successful drug cartel for years without their knowledge. I had 4 hours before Rebecca Foster arrived, and I intended to use every minute strategically. First, I called Margaret Torres. "The family confrontation went exactly as predicted," I told her. "They showed up with liquidation papers and medical school applications. Full exposure is confirmed." "Perfect. Rebecca Foster will love this angle. Successful entrepreneur emerges from dismissive family dynamic. It's exactly the kind of authentic story that builds brand loyalty." Margaret's corporate communications background was invaluable. David Chen called this morning. He wants to discuss not just wholesale bread supply, but having you develop signature desserts for all 3 restaurants. We're talking about a $25,000 monthly contract. $25,000 monthly. That was more than Dad's typical retainer from his biggest corporate client. "Set the meeting. What about the convention center contract?" "Linda Rodriguez is ready to sign, $8,000 this quarter, but she's projecting $15,000 quarterly once the new conference facility opens next year. She specifically mentioned your presentation skills and professional follow-through." I smiled. Professional follow-through, the exact quality my family had assumed I lacked. Next, I called Rebecca Foster to confirm our interview. "I'm particularly interested in your family's reaction to your success," she said. "Entrepreneur stories that include family conflict tend to resonate strongly with readers. People love seeing someone succeed despite lack of support from those closest to them." "There's definitely a story there," I confirmed. "My opening day was yesterday. It was illuminating." 3 hours later, Rebecca arrived with a photographer and immediately understood why I'd chosen the location. Sweet Gatherings looked exactly like what it was, a carefully designed prototype for scalable expansion. Clean lines, efficient workflow, Instagram-worthy presentation, but with genuine warmth and community feeling. "Tell me about your family's involvement in the business," Rebecca said, settling into the interview. "They weren't involved in building it, and they made it clear yesterday they're not involved in supporting it," I replied. "My opening day coincided with my sister's promotion party. They chose her celebration over my business launch." Rebecca's eyes lit up. This was exactly the kind of personal conflict that made business stories compelling. "How did that feel, as someone who'd invested your life savings in this venture, Oz?" It clarified things. I realized I'd been seeking approval from people who were never going to see value in what I was building. That's when I decided to focus on people who do recognize value: customers, business partners, industry professionals who understand growth potential. The photographer captured images of me working in the kitchen, reviewing franchise development materials, and standing in front of the Sweet Gatherings logo with my business plan visible on the counter. Professional, competent, strategic. Exactly the image that would counter my family's narrative of me as their irresponsible failure. "What's next for Sweet Gatherings?" Rebecca asked. "Expansion. We're looking at 5 locations over the next 18 months, with the goal of establishing Sweet Gatherings as the premier artisanal bakery franchise in the Pacific Northwest. Market research suggests we could capture 8% of the specialty baked goods segment within 3 years." As Rebecca packed up her equipment, She mentioned that the story would run as the Sunday business section cover feature. Family conflict angles always generate significant reader engagement. I expect this will be one of our most shared articles this quarter. After she left, I checked my phone to find 17 missed calls from various family members and a growing number of social media notifications. Word was spreading that I'd given a newspaper interview about my business and about yesterday's family dynamics. The first call I returned was to Mom. Eileen, Rebecca Foster called the hospital to fact-check some details about your background. People are asking questions. What exactly did you tell her? I told her the truth about building Sweet Gatherings, about my franchise development plans, and about what happened yesterday when my family chose Rosie's party over my opening day. Silence. Then, she's going to print that? Sunday morning business section cover story. Rebecca thinks it's exactly the kind of authentic entrepreneurship story readers connect with. The second call was Dad, his lawyer voice tight with controlled panic. We need to discuss damage control. A newspaper article about family conflict could affect all our professional reputations. You should have considered professional reputations before publicly choosing Rosie's career over mine. The damage was done yesterday. The newspaper is just documenting it. Rosie's call came next, her marketing professional brain working overtime. Eileen, this story is going to be everywhere. My company's CEO knows Rebecca Foster personally. He's going to see this article. Good. Maybe he'll understand why your social media strategy emphasizes authentic community engagement over manufactured family narratives. The beauty of what was unfolding was that I wasn't attacking my family. I was simply allowing their own choices to have natural consequences. They'd made their priorities clear publicly through social media posts and deliberate absence. Now those priorities were being examined by a business journalist who specialized in successful entrepreneurs overcoming family obstacles. By evening, Margaret had called with news that transformed everything. 3 potential investors want to meet with us next week based on early word about the Herald feature. One of them is Pacific Northwest Ventures. They backed the company that developed Burgerville into a regional chain. Pacific Northwest Ventures. I'd researched them months earlier as a potential investor, but assumed I'd need at least a year of operational success before approaching them. Now they were approaching me, drawn by exactly the kind of authentic entrepreneur story that Rebecca Foster was preparing to tell. There's more, Margaret continued. David Chen's restaurant group wants to expand our discussion beyond wholesale contracts. They're interested in co-developing a fast casual bakery concept that could scale nationally. They're talking about a $200,000 development partnership. I sat in my empty bakery, looking at the financial projections my family had dismissed as fantasy just 12 hours earlier. Everything I'd planned was accelerating beyond my most optimistic timeline, driven by the same family conflict that was supposed to destroy my confidence and force me back into their comfortable narrative of me as the disappointing daughter. My phone buzzed with one final call of the day, Tyler calling from New York. Eileen, I need to ask you something directly. Is everything you showed us today legitimate? The market research, the franchise plans, the financial backing? Nothing in his tone suggested the familiar condescension I'd grown up hearing. He sounded like one professional asking another for straight information. Completely legitimate. Margaret Torres has 20 years of corporate expansion experience. The market research cost me $15,000 because I wanted institutional quality data. The financial backing is secured through investors who specialize in artisanal food franchise development. Jesus Christ. He was quiet for a long moment. Eileen, if you execute this plan successfully, you're going to be worth more money than Dad and Mom combined within 5 years. I know. And we almost convinced you to liquidate the whole thing because we assumed you didn't know what you were doing. You did assume that. The question is why you assumed it instead of asking me about my actual business plan. Another long pause. because it was easier to maintain the family dynamic where you were the one who needed fixing instead of recognizing that you'd become the one with the most promising future. It was the most honest thing any of my family had said to me in years, and it came 12 hours too late to change what was about to be published in Sunday morning's Herald Business section. Sunday morning arrived with the Herald Business section featuring a large photograph of me in Sweet Gathering's kitchen, wearing my chef's coat and looking confidently professional. The headline read, "Rising Entrepreneur Builds Franchise Empire While Family Focused Elsewhere." Rebecca Foster had crafted a masterpiece of business journalism that managed to tell my success story while making my family look exactly as dismissive and short-sighted as they'd actually been. She'd interviewed Margaret Torres, who provided glowing testimonials about my strategic thinking and business acumen. She'd spoken with David Chen, who praised my product quality and professional approach. She'd even somehow reached Linda Rodriguez at the convention center, who confirmed that Sweet Gatherings had secured significant corporate catering contracts. The article detailed my $340,000 personal investment, the franchise development plans, the projected $2.3 million in revenue by year 3, and the backing from Torres Development Partners. It presented me as exactly what I was, a serious entrepreneur with significant financial backing and professional partnerships. Then came the family dynamics paragraph that changed everything. Okay. Marshall's business launch coincided with a family celebration for her sister's corporate promotion. Despite sending personal invitations weeks in advance, Marshall found herself alone in Sweet Gatherings on opening day, while family members attended the competing event. It clarified my priorities, Marshall says. I realized I'd been seeking approval from people who weren't going to recognize the value of what I was building. So I decided to focus on business partners and customers who do see that value. The article's impact was immediate and devastating to my family's professional standing. By 8 a.m., I had text messages from 3 of Dad's corporate clients who'd read the Herald story. By 9 a.m., Mom was getting calls from hospital board members asking about the family situation described in the article. By 10 a.m., Rosie's company CEO had forwarded the article to their entire marketing team as an example of authentic entrepreneur storytelling versus manufactured family narratives. Margaret called at with news that accelerated everything beyond our wildest projections. Pacific Northwest Ventures wants to schedule a formal presentation for Wednesday. They're talking about a $500,000 Series A investment that would fund 10 locations over 2 years. But Eileen, there's something else. The Herald story is being picked up by regional business publications. Your story is going viral in entrepreneurship circles. By noon, the Sweet Gatherings social media accounts had gained 1,200 new followers. The bakery phone was ringing constantly with catering inquiries, franchise questions, and interview requests from business podcasters who specialized in success stories. 3 food bloggers had posted Instagram stories about wanting to visit Sweet Gatherings based on the Herald article. The most satisfying call came at 2 p.m. from an unexpected source. Dr. Patricia Levinson from the Hospital Administration Program Mom had tried to push me toward. Ms. Marshall, I read Rebecca Foster's article about your franchise development strategy. I wanted you to know that our MBA program would be very interested in having you guest lecture about entrepreneurial finance and strategic planning. Your case study of bootstrapping expansion capital while maintaining operational control is exactly what we teach in our advanced business strategy courses. The hospital where my mother worked as an administrator wanted me to teach their MBA students about business strategy. The irony was so perfect, I almost laughed out loud. The afternoon brought a parade of developments that reshaped my entire business trajectory. David Chen's restaurant group officially offered the $200,000 co-development partnership. Linda Rodriguez at the convention center increased our catering contract to $12,000 quarterly based on anticipated demand driven by the Herald publicity. 2 commercial real estate developers called about optimal locations for Sweet Gatherings expansion sites. Most importantly, Margaret secured meetings with 4 additional investor groups, all drawn by the Herald story and the authentic growth narrative it represented. Family conflict stories resonate because they're relatable, she explained. Everyone understands family dynamics that don't support professional success. You've become the entrepreneur who succeeded despite dismissive family members, and that's incredibly powerful branding. By evening, my net worth had effectively doubled through secured partnerships and investor interest, while my family was dealing with professional consequences that would last for months. Dad's law firm partners had scheduled an emergency Monday meeting to discuss the Herald article's impact on their family values marketing approach. Mom was facing questions from the hospital board about her judgment and family management skills. Rosie's company was reconsidering her role in client relationship management after the article raised questions about her authenticity in family-focused marketing campaigns. Tyler called Sunday night from New York, his investment banker brain fully engaged. Eileen, I've been running numbers based on the partnerships mentioned in the Herald article. If you execute everything you've got lined up, you're looking at a business valuation of $3 to $5 million within 18 months. Conservative estimates, yes. I need to ask you something, and I want a straight answer. Did you plan this family conflict to generate publicity for your business launch? I considered the question carefully. I planned for the possibility that you'd all choose Rosie's party over my opening day, because that fit the family pattern I'd observed for years. I prepared business strategies that didn't depend on your support because I expected I wouldn't have it. Whether that became a newspaper story was your choice, not mine. But you knew we'd react the way we did. I knew you'd dismiss my business as unrealistic because you'd been dismissing my professional capabilities for years. I prepared for that dismissal by building something so substantial that it would speak for itself. Jesus, Eileen, you played us. No, Tyler, I planned around you. There's a difference. Monday morning brought the most satisfying validation of my entire strategy. Pacific Northwest Ventures had moved our Wednesday meeting to Tuesday, and they wanted to discuss not just Series A funding, but potentially acquiring Sweet Gatherings as their flagship investment in artisanal food franchising. Margaret called with details that exceeded every projection we'd made. They're looking at $750,000 immediate investment for accelerated expansion, plus a development partnership that could scale Sweet Gatherings to 30 locations within 3 years. Eileen, they want to build what you started into a regional powerhouse that could compete with Panera and Corner Bakery. $750,000. That was more than my parents' combined annual income, and it was being offered because I'd built something valuable while they assumed I was failing. The final vindication came Tuesday afternoon when I signed the letter of intent with Pacific Northwest Ventures. The deal included $750,000 in immediate expansion capital, operational support for franchise development, and a structure that maintained my majority ownership while providing resources for rapid scaling. Margaret had negotiated brilliantly. I would retain 60% ownership and serve as CEO of the expanded operation. Sweet Gatherings would grow from 1 location to 10 within 12 months, with projections of 30 locations by year 3. My personal stake in a 30-location franchise would be worth approximately $8 million. As I signed the documents that transformed my life, my phone buzzed with a group text from my family. We need to talk. Can we take you to dinner and discuss everything properly? I looked at the letter of intent that guaranteed my financial independence, the franchise development plan that would make me wealthy within 3 years, and the business relationships that had emerged because I'd focused on people who recognized value instead of seeking approval from people who didn't. Then I responded to their text. I'm available Sunday at 2 p.m. at Sweet Gatherings. Business hours, professional setting. We can discuss the franchise expansion and what role, if any, you'd like in my future success. 6 months later, Sweet Gatherings operated from 8 locations across 3 cities, with my personal net worth approaching $2.1 million. Dad had quietly started referring business clients to my corporate catering services. Mom brought hospital board members to sweet gatherings events and introduced me as my daughter, the successful entrepreneur. Rosie's company contracted us for all their corporate events, and she'd stopped posting family photos that excluded my business achievements. Tyler invested $50,000 in the Series B funding round and now served on Sweet Gatherings' advisory board, bringing his financial expertise to support the expansion he'd once dismissed as impossible. They'd learned that dismissing someone's professional capabilities carries real consequences when that person succeeds, despite their lack of support. More importantly, I'd learned that building something valuable was more satisfying than winning approval from people who'd never bothered to see my actual potential. Success, it turned out, was the best response to family dismissal and the foundation for rebuilding relationships on terms that actually reflected who I'd become.